All right, so it's 6:01, so we can go ahead and get started and folks will be able to trickle in as they come in. So I just first and foremost want to say welcome and thank you all for joining us tonight for the ADIEM Transition from Trainee to Faculty panel. My name is Tiffany Mitchell. I'm an instructor of emergency medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. And I'm super excited to welcome our esteemed panelists to come and speak with us today about their experiences early in their career in academic emergency medicine. So I'm going to go ahead and give our panelists the opportunity to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about who they are and where they're from and what they're passionate about and working on at their respective institutions. So I'm going to start with Dr. Cortlyn Brown. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. I always have to go first. So my name is Cortlyn. Everybody can just call me Cortlyn. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I did residency at University of California, San Francisco, where I was chief resident, med school at Yale. I've been heavily involved in SNMA, was national vice president many, many years ago. And now I am faculty at Carolinas in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm our vice director for DEI for the Department of Emergency Medicine. And then I also run our healthcare disparities in emergency medicine rotation for our fourth year sub-Is. And I'm really excited to have this open conversation with everybody.
Thanks so much for being here. And Dr. Arthur Pope.
Hi, everyone. My name is Arthur. I am originally from Chicago. I did medical school at Loyola in Chicago, and then I took a little bit different route getting to medical school. I actually did my PhD before med school in like biomedical research and finished at University of Florida. Went home to Chicago, did residency at University of Chicago, and now I am 6 months into being a faculty member at UPenn. Things that I am passionate about, and actually Cortlyn kind of helped me in the beginning when I was thinking about applying to faculty jobs, and she was like, yes, don't do fellowship, apply to faculty. The things I'm interested in, I'm definitely interested in like pipeline, especially like pre-medical, getting more URMs into medicine, hopefully one day, my long-term goal is to hopefully be like a dean in a medical school, like admissions or student affairs or something like that.
That's my goal also.
Fantastic.
Operation.
Thanks for being here, Dr. Pope. I'm going to have to stop myself from saying Pop Pope. It's just like a natural thing. So I'm going to just correct me if that slips out. And Dr. Winfield, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Louisiana. So I did medical school at LSU in New Orleans. Prior to that, I got my MPH at Tulane. I did residency at Cook County, stayed for a year after that for my simulation fellowship. And so now this is my post-fellowship. This is me going into my second year as full-time faculty. I kind of formalized our diversity and inclusion efforts. And so I'm currently the chair of the DEI committee for the Department of Emergency Medicine. And I am obviously a lover of SIM since I did a fellowship. And so I'm the assistant director of the Simulation Center for Cook County. And what drives me is all things related to sort of, having a sort of a diverse representative body of residents and creating safe environments for them. And so that's kind of what I do.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being here, Dr. Winfield. So we're just going to jump right in. I'm going to ask you guys questions. Feel free to answer individually. And as we go along to our audience members, please feel free to write any questions that you have in our chat and we'll address them as they come up. Okay, so great. So this is a question for the panels. What was the biggest thing that surprised you as a new attending? What was the most challenging? Was there anything that kind of, any happy surprises, not so happy surprises? What was the biggest thing that shocked you?
I guess I can go. So since I'm probably the newest.
It's fresh for you.
Yeah, it's like really
you're
fresh.
Still being surprised.
6 months in and I'm still like, I don't know what's happening. But I think the hardest part for me is one, I've left Chicago. So I moved to Philadelphia and it's still in a pandemic. So I'm new to a city that I don't know a lot of people in. So that's been an adjustment, trying to find a new community. I think secondly is adjusting to a new medical system. So things run totally different at Penn than they do at U Chicago in terms of like admissions and how we, deal with patients in the emergency department. So like learning that role has been difficult. And then I spent the summer studying for board. So now that's over. Like that was, a very hard transition for me. So now it's like all of that has been done for the last 6 months. And so now I'm starting to try to focus on like, what is my long-term career going to look like and what are the things I'm going to develop. So one of the things I have developed here is we've developed like a URM mentoring program for the residents. So that's something that I have to develop and have started to launch here at Penn. So those are the things I'm now starting to think about. But yeah, it was that, I think this transition this summer was very, very difficult for me. I kept telling people it's almost like being a first year resident again. Like you have no idea what's going on. You're still trying to figure out everything. And so that's kind of where I am right now.
Absolutely.
I think for me, probably the most shocking thing was I thought that like going from a resident working like 20 shifts in 28 days to like now being the attending who's only working like 12 to 13, that somehow my schedule would be lighter. And it was not. So I came in kind of volunteering for a lot of things like, oh shoot, I'll help with oral boards. And yeah, I'll be at SIM every Tuesday and I'll do this and I'll do that. And so for me, my first year to year and a half was really learning to advocate for myself in terms of protecting my time and making sure that I was doing things that were either of interest to me or further my career goals. So I think my biggest surprise was realizing how like I feel like I'm busier now than I was as a chief resident. So yeah, that was mine.
Relatable content. Dr. Brown.
I 100% agree with what everybody said so far, and would just add, it was surprising to me to learn the different things that are valued. And we'll touch on this a little bit later, but what matters for promotion? So does a local lecture that you felt had a lot of meaning and you really connected with your learners, does that matter for promotion? At most institutions, it doesn't really. And so just trying to keep that in perspective and to change kind of my goals and my views on how I wanted to get to my ultimate career goal.
Glad you brought up promotion. So I guess it'll be a bit more relevant for Dr. Winfield and Dr. Brown, but talk about what that process has been like. Has it been difficult finding information? So what are the specific criteria at your institutions? Was there anything that surprised you in terms of what you needed to do? What are the requirements? Was there anything that surprised you about that process? And when did you know that it was, when did it feel right? And how did you initiate that process?
So I'm only like a year out of residency. So I am so far from that process, actively pursuing it. But I think that it's important to literally start thinking about from the day that you join faculty. And that's because whenever you do go up for promotion, it's, putting together your portfolio is a lot of work. You need a lot of things that you might not realize that you need. So you need, comments from students that you gave lectures to on how great the lecture was. You need comments from patients you saw about your patient care. So things that you wouldn't normally think to collect, you need to start collecting. And so one advice that one of our other junior faculty members gave me here is to start a folder of literally everything that you need for promotion. So make sure that the institution that you're joining is super transparent about what you need for promotion. Make sure that it's very clear and that they have a pathway that fits your interest. So a lot of academic institutions are very focused on research. That's not my thing. I do a little bit of research, but I wanted a place where I wasn't forced into that pathway. So you have to make sure that the specific criteria, that they have pathways that fit your interest, and then literally just start creating those folders and put in everything that fits within those, the second that you get it.
Yeah.
It's going to be like, kind of like what Dr. Brown was saying, it's going to be very sort of institution dependent. Where I work is very, very, very different than probably either of these guys, because they're probably in true academic systems. Cook County is, governmental institution, and we have a loose affiliation with Rush next door, which is an academic institution. And so technically our promotions and titles come from Rush, but within county and within my core duties at county, none of that matters. It doesn't at all. So more so for us junior faculty at county, we go through this sort of a clinical instructor to assistant to associate, because we may leave county one day, but it actually doesn't matter in terms of, what my buy down looks like at work and what I have to do and what my salary is and what I'm required to do. So I am at a very different institution, and most people probably won't be in that situation. I know that for me, I come in as a clinical instructor right off. And then once I passed written and oral boards, I then became an assistant professor. And then there's like some stepwise things, the types of lectures I have to give and what format that kind of changes whether I become associate, but I'm nowhere near that. So I'm just kind of building my niche and making sure I'm giving the appropriate lectures and trying to do research, recognizing that my institution doesn't care, but it'll probably matter when I leave to go somewhere else.
Yeah, in my institution, it's super set criteria. You have to have this amount of publications, this amount of presentations. You have to be considered either a local leader within your field of interest for assistant professor, and then, a regional leader, national leader as you go up in the ranks. One thing that's important to think about whenever you're considering joining faculty is some institutions have, I don't know what they call it, but it's basically like a year where they don't require you to have that certain number of publications or certain number of presentations, so that it lets you kind of learn the system before you're feeling that large amount of pressure. So that's something to kind of ask about.
Got you. Do they have like up or out requirements where you guys are, where you kind of have to move up, or or are you given as much time as you need?
I can do nothing. I can show up to work. I can do whatever my core faculty teaching things are, and then I would be fine. So my environment's very different from others.
Yeah, and then we also have like a different pathway. So like a lot of academic institutions, they may have like, you may be just clinical faculty, you may be like academic, and that has different requirements. So how I was actually hired was as a clinical faculty member. So my title is like a clinical assistant professor. So essentially what these first 2 years are for me is to figure out what my niche is going to be. So it's almost like I'm spending that time in fellowship, but actually getting paid as an attending. And so, so it's like giving me that time to develop what my area will be. And then hopefully within 2 years, I'll move on to the academic clinician track. So in that regard, I will have more responsibility in terms of like making sure that I'm doing a lot more teaching in the medical school. Obviously I'm teaching the residents because I'm working with them all the time, but then there'll just be those little bit more requirements that I'll have versus right now, it's sort of like your job is to be mainly clinical and you have some resident education responsibility for conferences and some medical students, but it's not like a full requirement of your job right now.
Gotcha. Did each of you have a clear, in terms of carving out your niche in academic emergency medicine, did each of you guys have a clear idea of what you wanted to accomplish and where you wanted, what you wanted your role to look like before you started your job? Or how did you come to that place where how did you know what you wanted to do or what you wanted your role to look like?
I'll tell you, I was all over the place, to be honest. Even with the fellowship. So I did the SIM fellowship thinking I would be some kind of SIM educator, and maybe I was going to leave Chicago and go back to Louisiana or somewhere else, and then kind of realized I wasn't going to do that. And so I was like, well, we already have a SIM director. I will help out with SIM, but they needed an APD. And I was like, oh, to be a Black woman in a position of leadership within a residency program is a pretty I think that's a great thing, and I can make some changes there. So I became an APD, and I continued to help out with simulation. And as a resident, I had always been involved with our underrepresented minority recruitment efforts, but that's kind of all they were. And they weren't like a true sort of well-rounded committee. So then I founded the committee too. And so again, kind of going back to my first bit of how busy I was, it all kind of became too much. So I ended up switching back to SIM and realizing kind of like, I really did the fellowship for a reason. I really did love it. Kind of stepping out of APD as much as it hurt, because I was still able to do the things I wanted to do with recruitment, was still able to work with the PD and the APDs and get buy-in for my diversity initiatives. And so as long as I could get that, it was worth kind of stepping away from my own time. So I've kind of moved around a bit in the last 3 years, and then was able to step into the assistant director of the simulation center. But I did kind of waffle a little bit and try and figure out what felt best and what protected my time and inspired me. And so as long as it's, and I think for anybody here, like, I find that as long as I come back to what drives me, which is seeing more Black and brown and gay and trans people in safe environments in medicine, as long as I'm doing that, I'm good. So I just circle back to that. And that's just kind of whatever's going to leverage me to get there and do that. So
touching on that, when did you know it was time to make a shift? Like, did you hit a wall? Like, how did you know, like, all right, I'm at a place, like, I gotta change things? I think that can be difficult. I think a lot of us, we're all professional students, right? So we're used to kind of jumping through hoops. And when do you realize that you don't really want to jump through that next hoop, you might want to go a different way?
I hit a wall. It was, I had some excitement about STEM, in the beginning, I'm like, well, let's write this case. I'm going to build this really cool model. I want to do this research project. And in the beginning, I had a lot of energy for coming fresh out of fellowship because you don't work that much. I wasn't getting paid like Arthur's getting paid. I had to moonlight for some of that attending cash. But I realized like, okay, I don't even have time to sit down and read or think about what I want to research. What's my next question? What thing do I want to write about? I kind of lost joy in doing things that I wanted to do, and I was just tired. And it got to the point where I was looking at my schedule and I was like, dang, I don't have any days free of county. Like every day I'm either doing some event or something else. And so that's kind of where I hit like a literal, it was all too much and something had to go. So.
And when you made that shift, did you feel supported by the institution? Was that difficult?
I think my mentor in the department is the head of the STEM Center. And then I'm very close with the PD, and I kind of sat down with both of them. And I think, I did hang on to it for longer than I should have because I felt bad for the PD who would have to pick up my slack and screening the ARIS application, so on and so forth. But I really had a discussion with him about it being from a mental health framework. I was being overworked, and part of that was related to some imposter syndrome, feeling like I needed to do a bunch to prove that I was there. And so I think people were very understanding. And I feel like if you're at a place where you come to them and say, I'm burned out, I'm not doing well, this is too much for me, and they don't hear you and don't accept you stepping back, then you should probably be looking for another job. So
yeah, absolutely. And then Dr. Brown, I didn't give you a chance to answer the original question, which was, when did you know, how did you figure out what you wanted your niche to look like in academic emergency medicine?
Is that to me?
Yeah.
I mean,
did you already answer? I think Dr. Arthur, you already answered, right? I think. Who did not answer? Whoever didn't answer can go.
Arthur, take it away.
Oh, okay. I mean, I kind of partially answered like what I wanted to do, but I think it's something I've just been interested in. I can think back to like high school. I always was involved in like programs that was trying to get kids like me interested in science. And so even in graduate school, I developed these types of programs. And so I always knew my career would be someplace where, I would find a kid like me from the west side of Chicago who could hopefully come on to be a physician or a scientist or something, and just provide that mentorship support for them. So I've always kind of had that passion because somebody helped me to get to this place in life. So that's kind of how I found my niche. It's just something that has just been my lifelong like goal and dream for me. So.
Yeah, I think mine was kind of similar. I always knew what I wanted my niche to be. And so whenever I was job hunting, I went in being like, this is who I'm going to be. This is what I'm going to bring. I'm going to focus on these efforts. Do they fit within what your mission statement is? Do they fit within your initiatives that your department is having over the next several years? And sometimes the answer was yes, and it was a good fit. And other times it was no. And, I was very honest with that. And a lot of institutions were very honest. And so I think that helped me find the right job. Also reaching out to institutions and kind of learning where they are, on the inclusion spectrum. Are they having those conversations? Do they even know what that word means?
Yeah.
How receptive would they be to my joining faculty and starting all these new initiatives, coming from California with my crazy California ways.
Right.
And just like I was saying, I really came in knowing what I wanted my role to be. So I actually came in and asked for the title that I have. So I came in and asked for the vice director title. That was a role that did not exist at all before. And that brings to an important point of, what can you negotiate for whenever you're joining academics? Because it's not a community. So you're not really going to negotiate your salary. It's pretty set. Some institutions might. I've never heard of one that would. But the things that you can negotiate, and I'd love to hear from others also. So like your CME, your buy down, your titles, whether or not they are supporting certain research efforts, any projects that you want to be involved in, and the support that you want to have for those projects. So like admin support, financial support. Those are some of the things that you can negotiate joining academics.
That's excellent information. we do have some questions from the audience that I want to get to. So one question is, so it looks like now they're using, a lot of institutions using publications as part of their requirements for promotion. What are you guys' thoughts on including social media presence as a form of publication to replace the traditional methods of publication?
I mean, me personally, I don't have enough to have an opinion. I'm not like really on somebody who decides what the promotions process is. But I did see an article sort of in the last week talking about sort of utilizing social media presence and blogs and things as a means to build your CV and to build your portfolio. So, I mean, me personally, I think a lot goes into that, and I think it should be included, but I don't really make any decisions. I think even now, institutions are just now starting to getting around to giving people credit for social justice work and, sort of more equity work, as those things weren't included before. So I don't know when these higher up, sort of more Ivy places will get to accepting that, but it has been a discussion and I think it should be considered, but I'm junior faculty, nobody's listening to me yet.
Yeah, I'm all for it, but I don't know when it would ever get accepted. At different institutions where I've looked at their promotion criteria, it's not always the academic publication. So it can be, a podcast that you did, a social justice piece on a website. So it's not necessarily at every institution that you need like an annals article. But I think it's really institution specific. So that's important to have those conversations, because if you're not, a big researcher, you don't want to be stuck somewhere where they want you to publish 5 papers in academic emergency medicine every year.
Right.
Yeah. And again, that depends on like your institution dependent and your track. So like the track that I would potentially be on, like scholarship is not important as much. It's just more of like, what is your niche? What value are you adding to the department, really? So I think that's where you have to look at those nuances of those different tracks that they may offer when you're applying for a faculty job. I think that's important. And again, we talked about like different institutions may require you to have like a national presence. So I can see like social media helping with that. Like if a lot of people know who you are, right, that may end up impacting like how your research gets funded or how it's, disseminated amongst the masses. And then when you get letters, people are like, oh yes, I know this person because I met them through social media. I mean, actually I have a story. That's how I actually got my job, but we will talk about
Wow.
But yeah.
That sounds like a good story, actually.
Yeah, but so.
All right, we'll circle back to that.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question in the chat. So when it comes to buy down, has your institution supported those of you in roles of DEI leadership to be able to dedicate some time to this role?
It has been a battle for me this last year to get buy down really for anything that I do. I think, and this is not against my institution, but I think that for a long time, things have been done a certain way. So junior faculty came in and they worked more than senior faculty, and that was just the way it was. But now,
some of I think we have maybe some like residents. Can we explain exactly what buy down means?
Oh, sorry. So buy down is basically a way of sort of removing your shift counts to account for things that you may be doing, whether you're bringing in grant funding or you're teaching or, you get promoted to some role, then that's the reduction in number of shifts. And it's calculated at different ways at different places. So for our institution, full-time is technically 14 shifts in 28 days. And then you have some loosely specified teaching things that you have to do. But I came in as an APD and I was supposed to be working 11. And that was just for APD. But again, some of these older people in leadership roles with this notion of junior faculty. And I'm like, well, no, hold up. I got a fellowship. I'm at SIM every Tuesday. I'm leading your diversity efforts that you are like reporting to the ACGME because it's now required. So where's my time to do this? And so it was a lot of back and forth, and I finally got down to like a much better number in shifts. But it took a lot of complaining. And I'll say this is the importance of having like a mentor or somebody who's above you in a leadership position, because if it had just been me complaining, like the junior faculty, these millennials, they complain too much. They don't know how to work. And I heard this a lot, when I was a junior faculty, I worked this much. And so we would expect you to do it. I'm like, well, you didn't come in doing what I'm doing. You didn't come in with a fellowship. So you meet different people, but
and maybe you should have advocated for yourself.
You should have advocated.
Yeah.
So I had someone at the table advocating for me with the chairman. And eventually I kind of got to a point where that was protected. But even then, it's not explicitly for my DEI, it's loosely for everything that I do. But obviously I probably should be working less, but I'm taking it piecemeal. So I got a reduction this year and I'll continue to fight for another one next year.
Finding that advocate is really important. Was that difficult finding like, how did you, find that person? Do you have a prior relationship?
It was easier for me because I trained in county. So I was already like 5 years, 6 years in at that point. So it was easier for me.
Yeah.
I think for me, my institution has been really supportive of me. And so, it wasn't really that hard to get buy down. Buy down in academics is always, people say it's like 3-to-1, 2-to-1. So you generally, for every 3 hours that you work on things that aren't clinical shifts, you get 1 hour buy down. So that's pretty standard. But another way to go about it, and these for people that are, joining faculty or thinking about moving up in the ranks, if the department isn't specifically giving you buy down, then go outside the department. So is the med school, are they looking for a role to fill, and then they can provide part of the salary, and that can help you get buy down from the department? Is the undergrad doing something where you can get involved, and then they'll pay part of your salary, and then you can get buy down that way. So it's not necessarily just through the department. There's many other ways.
And then another question that's related, what's the right time frame to ask for buy downs? So 6 months, a year, especially if you're doing heavy work, not only within the department, but within the entire hospital. When did you ask? When do you make that ask?
I wouldn't have joined my job if they didn't give it to me before.
Yeah, and I wasn't in a position to go show, like, coming in working for the county, they're like, here's your set salary, and then this is sort of, and these what your shifts are. And I was coming on in the middle of, like, we had gone on this big hiring freeze due to COVID. And so the fact that I was squeezed in at all, I wasn't about to come in being like,
right.
So give me a job. I think, and honestly, I was so overjoyed to be there and happy to contribute that I didn't realize, like, that I was working too much and it was time to ask for buy down until I'd kind of gotten to a different place. So I would ideally, if you're in a position to do what Dr. Brown did, to negotiate coming in, that would be good. I think and I would just, no matter where you go, I would ask for a clear path to whatever it is, in addition to your promotions, but also in terms of your buy down, like, kind of how are you deciding this? Because even still, we kind of don't have a great one where I work, and it's not, I love Cook County. I'll probably always work there, but I think, we kind of don't do a great job of kind of explaining what that looks like when people come on. And so that kind of creates confusion and resentment, and, people get mad. It's like, why am I working more than you? So I think for me, the good time was, I'd put that year in, I kind of got tired, and I was like, look at all the things that I've done for you guys for the last year. So, if you want me to continue to do this, and that's something else too, I was like, if you want me to be at every sim, if you want me to do this, then I can't work this much. And so that ended up, and when they didn't change things quickly enough, that's when I stepped back from the APD role. So you also have to kind of lay out what deliverables I can do with the time that you're giving me.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, chair people think in terms of data. So whenever you're presenting yourself or trying to advocate yourself, it's helpful to do it in terms of data. So if you're there for a year and you're, going up to them looking for buy down, you could say, I started these projects. These projects have had this statistical significant, improvement in the department. I've decreased our ED length of stay by this. I've increased the number of underrepresented residents by this. So having those concrete numbers rather than saying, I'm doing all this work, yay inclusion, yay diversity,
right?
Because that, that may be perceived well, but oftentimes it's just not the language that they're speaking.
It's a good point. Another great question from the audience. So being in residency comes with built-in supports and mentorship, ideally in the best situations. So how did you navigate finding mentorship as a junior faculty member, especially at a new institution? So Ashlea, you stayed at the same institution, but Arthur and Cortlyn, you guys were at a new institution. So what was that like? Has it been difficult?
Sure. So I can start. It's actually been really, when I was interviewing, that was one of the questions that I asked, was like, what does your mentorship structure look like? Because I know where I was training, one of the faculty members said, make sure, because as a junior faculty, that's going to be really important for your career long-term. And so I actually, short story of how I got my job is that I got a direct message from one of my current mentors here at Penn now. She was like, I see you're finishing residency. Are you looking for a job next year? And so Gina South and I are like, she's like one of my mentors now. And because
that's great.
and because I've told her like what I'm interested in, like we try to meet like every quarter. And then before I got here, I told my chair, like, I'm interested in like medical student education. So he hooked me up with the vice chair of our department, our education. So we met over the summer and I talked about what I was interested in. And then she introduced me now to someone in the med school who's like, okay, I want to help you out. So it's like, that's how it's all happened, is other people have introduced me. And I feel like I have a good mentorship group, even though I'm, from outside the institution. And I think that's been really helpful for me in terms of transitioning here, and everybody sort of being like, okay, we know what you want to do. We're going to help you get there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think I had a similar pathway, and then just reaching out to our national community. So, if there's some residents, more junior residents in the audience here, by the time that you're joining faculty, we may be mid-level faculty. And so, you could reach out to us because you met us at this session. Also, something that I learned that's really, really important, especially in academics, is the difference between mentorship and sponsorship.
Yes, thank you.
So I actually, until recently, did not know that they were different. And how I like to think of it is mentors advise, sponsors act. So a mentor, they can be somebody at any level. So they're going to provide some guidance, talk to you about, what you need to do to get to these next steps. Really just give you that advice. So they help with career development. Whereas a sponsor, so sponsors act. So sponsors need to have a lot of influence. So they need to be at least mid-level faculty. And they promote you in conversation with senior leaders. So they will, if a promotion's coming up, or if they hear about this great mentorship opportunity, they will put your name out there. So they're not necessarily, sitting down with you every month, going over your career, talking about how to navigate the academic waters. They're just doing the acting on your behalf. And so they're really helping with career advancement. And it's important to have both of those. And I think in academics, it might even be more important to have sponsorship. I personally think so, but yeah.
We need both, right? So the mentor is someone you can kind of, go back and forth and share your strengths and weaknesses with. But, the sponsor, that's, you want to have all your ducks in a row and all your T's crossed and your I's dotted before you go to.
And that's a good point that Cortlyn brought up. So that's when I met with the vice chair of education for our department. She's like, I want to sponsor you. She was like, my goal is to put underrepresented minorities in positions in power in the medical school. So that is what I'm going to be. So like he's actually said, she's like, when I hear a conversation and I know, I think you'll be appropriate for this role, I'm going to bring up your name. So that's, exactly what I got out of that conversation with her.
That is the perfect example of a sponsor. That's incredible.
So we have another question in the chat. So Dr. Pope and Dr. Brown, talk more about the need to do fellowship before getting an academic job. We are often told as residents, especially at 3-year programs, that it's too hard to get an academic faculty position right out of residency.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. So it's funny enough, again, I had actually, Danny, who was one of my co-chiefs at UChicago, I think was on the board with Cortlyn. And I kept thinking about, I was like, I need, so the thing I was told is that I need to do fellowship, a medical education fellowship, in order to do what I want to do eventually, which is, like I said, be an admin in a medical school. And so I kind of like bit my tongue and I was like, I already did a PhD. I'm old, like I'm a geriatric millennial. I'll be 40 this year. So it's just like,
I just want to make money.
I want to start my career. And so I went through the process of applying for fellowship. I interviewed for fellowship positions.
Wow.
And I actually talked to Cortlyn and she went over my CV. She's like, no, you should apply. I was like, okay. And then again, this Penn job sort of came up. And so I think it depends on your situation. I had an advanced degree going into residency in medical school. So I think that that kind of helped me. And then, in addition to doing some of the work that I was already doing prior to medical school, this DEI work is again, it's been a continuous thing, throughout my whole CV, if you look at it. And I was on EMRA's national board and then, being chief resident. So I think all those things helped me at the end of the day get to the faculty position. But, I think even coming from a 3-year, if you set yourself up well, it is totally a possibility. And I'm at a 4-year program. So, which also, makes it a little bit of a leap. And I was like, are you sure? Because, I come from a 3, and they're like, no, it's fine. So, it's worked out at the end of the day. For me personally, I think it's, been a good experience, and you have to sit down, talk to people. So I talked to multiple people to make sure, like, is this a possibility for me? And once they said yes, it gave me the green light, I went ahead for it, and it worked out.
Good.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I didn't do a fellowship. I considered a med ed fellowship, but honestly, in the end, I did not. I wanted to make an attending salary, did not want to spend another year, making a fellow salary, making a resident salary, and working those hours.
Right.
I did come from a 4-year program, and now I'm at a 3-year program. So I always thought that, 3-year program, it's going to be much harder to get the academic jobs. And I'm sure it is at some institutions. And at some institutions, you do need to do a fellowship. So there's, a few across the country. California is notorious for that. And so they won't even hire, no matter how incredible you are, if you didn't do a fellowship. But you don't have to go to those places. And all of our residents here that are very academic minded have no problem joining academic jobs coming from 3-year program. It really just depends on your situation, what background you come with, and how developed your niche is. So if you already know exactly what you want to do, if you've been working towards it, just like Arthur was saying, I don't necessarily see the need for a fellowship unless you want to go to those few institutions that will require it.
Right.
Figure out where you want to go and kind of see what they've been hiring, because it will matter. Because if you really want to go to California, you got to kind of do what California wants you to do. I think the biggest thing you can do is kind of like what they did throughout their residency, is build your niche and build your expertise and get some stuff on your CV so that they're more likely to hire you. So yeah, not required, but it'll be dependent on where you want to go.
So I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to talk about the transition from being a learner to being an educator. And were there any challenges that you encountered in terms of that shift of having to now teach in addition to your clinical responsibilities? And what are some of your strategies for balancing teaching and taking care of patients?
Well, I'm still learning. I think that's
I think
that's one of the hardest transitions for me too, is because I feel like as a new attending, so how the structure works here is that there are some shifts that I do work with the 4th year. And so there will be the junior attending essentially. And so their responsibility for a lot of teaching. And so a lot of times I just take a back seat and I'm just like checking the board to make sure the intern put in things correctly. And then even when I am with like 2nd and 3rd years on a different team, again, a lot of my time in the beginning has been spent making sure that, stories are accurate, that we're putting appropriate, testing, things like that.
Making sure no one dies.
And making sure no one dies. And I told them, I was like, as long as you don't do anything outrageous that's going to kill the patient, I will let you, like manage and do what is appropriate. But otherwise, I will pull you back in and say, this is not, so those are things I'm still learning how to like balance that right now. And I think, that's something that I'm actively want to get better at. So, maybe they can help me figure it out. But yeah.
No, I definitely agree. I think it's kind of learning what type of attending you want to be. So are you going to be one of the more conservative attendings in your workup because you're junior faculty and you're just kind of not sure? Or are you going to be kind of the other opposite and be like, let's do this. I think I'm kind of on the less conservative side. But then, it comes with the challenges of, you need to know which learners that you can trust, which learners that, you need to have a little bit more supervision for, need to have a little bit more support behind them. So that's something that has been hard to learn. But I also think that most residencies now do a really good job of at least teaching you some basics of being an educator or a supervisor. A lot of the programs have that 3rd year or 4th year in that pre-attending role. And even if your program doesn't have that, you frequently do it on shift whenever your 1st year comes to you and asks like, hey, what will you do? Like, you're already being an educator. So you're already doing a lot of the work that you would do. So it's really just refining it.
Yeah.
I think too, I agree with everything they said. I think too, the good thing is, one of the good things to do is, I lost my train of thought, Jesus. Don't compare yourself to other people. So I feel like there were people I had that were really good teachers, or they would sit down and they would talk to you about some study and something. I'm like, man, I can't do it like that. But instead I chose to focus on like the way that I teach and what I'm really good at. I'm very good at flow. I'm very good at efficiency. So that's the thing that I teach them. This is how you run a room. This is how you three people back to back. And so, as long as I'm explaining my thought process to them and they know why I'm doing something and I can explain that clearly, then that is enough. I don't need to compare myself to somebody else who sits down and draws some pharmacologic cascade or something. I am who I am. I teach the way I am. My strengths are my strengths. And that's enough, I think.
That is such a good point. I'm not going to be that, academician who cites all the papers. Like, that's not me. That's not my strengths. I will do my best to keep up with the data for my patients, but it's only for my patients. And, sometimes you're on shift with, for example, like a PEM fellow who knows more about pediatric emergency medicine than you do because they're a third-year PEM fellow. And so you just focus on what you can teach them and you don't feel bad for the things that you can't teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you make that shift from residency to attending, there's a social isolation factor, right? So as we were talking about this, we were talking about, some of the issues that kind of come up. And one thing that I think that I didn't expect, and a couple of folks didn't expect, were just, you go from having a cohort of your peers, you're all kind of around the same age, kind of in the same position in life for the most part, and then you go to being, maybe the youngest or the most junior person on this faculty. Was it difficult making that shift, especially if you're moving to a new city where you don't necessarily, know anyone? Like, what was that like? And how did your home life, your work-life balance kind of take a hit in that respect?
I am seriously struggling with that. That's probably the hardest thing for me right now. So, I moved to a new city. I came from UCSF, which is like a very, free-spirited program.
Yeah, that's fun.
Like very fun-loving. And, here it's very fun-loving also, but it's just much more structured and a little bit more formal. Still just as supportive, still just as great, but it's just a different way about going for it. And so, oftentimes I feel like I bond more with the residents because we're similar age, similar backgrounds, come from some of the same communities. So it's hard trying to keep that professionalism balance, learning where it is at the specific institution that you're at, because it may be different than where you're coming from. So that's been really, really difficult. And so, I've just had some conversations with residents about like, hey, can you give me some feedback on this? Like, I trust you. Do I ever, make the residents feel uncomfortable if I'm going out with you guys? Like, things like that. Just have those honest conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say that's one thing I've also, it's been an adjustment, I will say. I think this year they hired, I think there were like 4 or 5 other of us who came from outside the Penn system. So that's been helpful because we have I have a little community within that. And so we can talk about the things about like how it's different from where we trained. And so when I get, maybe get a little frustrated or being like, oh, this is not something I would do, but I think that's been really helpful. And I'm still trying to find that, that group within the department that, I can reliably just be like, oh, let's hang out and, do stuff. So I think that's still been hard. And then again, with, being locked down during a pandemic still sort of, so it's been harder to again, find that community within Philadelphia. So that's something I'm still sort of adjusting to here. But
my first few months at my current position, I was like, I don't think I've met anyone in person outside of, the hi, bye and sign out. I was like, I don't think I've, met everyone over Zoom, but yeah, it's tough.
And they've been trying to do more wellness activities with us. So in the summertime when we could do outdoor things, they tried to here are the new faculty, come out and meet them. And then they had a thing with the nurses and it was the APPs and the faculty to meet. And then the nurses had a Eagles tailgate that I went to meet some of the
fun
there. So, I've been trying so that they know who I am and get to know them out, a little bit too.
Ashley, did you have any difficult, or you were,
I was like, I'm just gonna be
from, everybody. So so got it. You the residents, the faculty.
It was a little bit of a transition because a lot of the residents had known me as a resident, right?
Right. Was that weird?
So, it was a lot of first names, which I didn't mind as much, but now that the interns call me Dr. Winfield, I kind of like that a little bit better.
Yeah.
And, mostly I think I had, it garnered a pretty decent amount of respect from the residents, sort of being their chief and being there and being present. So working with them wasn't bad, but kind of realizing the split, like, oh, maybe I can't do this with them now, or I can't gossip with them about this like I used to.
You can't talk crap about the other residents now that you're no longer.
That guy sucks. I get in trouble, I get fired, and then I went out. So yeah, it was slightly different, but a little bit easier, because even then I had relationships with my mentor as a resident, sort of just became kind of like my friend, and we'd already kind of been working that way. And so there's a core group of other more junior female faculty that we'll kind of text and talk to things about. And don't forget your residency classmates. There's still a group text. Every now and then somebody be like, would you pull this out of this? Or would you do this? And so it's nice to remember that network you had from before.
Absolutely. No, that's a good point. We have another question in the chat. So my future academic job in 6 months does not have any Black faculty. I feel supported, but do you have any tips or suggestions for those of us in positions where mentorship by URIM colleagues won't be an option? So cultural mentorship, what are the pitfalls and challenges of that?
I think I'm lucky in a way because I have another Black female with me, but we're both junior. In terms of looking above me, there's not really anyone. And so I've had to find mentors outside and other Black faculty outside sometimes to talk about things specifically for sort of niches and more career paths that are sort of like some of the DEI stuff, right? Like there's nobody really doing that within my department. And so to find that kind of stuff, I had to reach out. So
that's surprising at Cook County. I would expect better.
We had Dr. Bowman, but then he retired. And so, while we value diversity, there's really nobody to kind of take me by the hand and be like, these are the components of equity. This is trauma-informed care, like none of that. So I joined an ACGME community that's about DEI, and there's tons of DEI leaders in there, and they're Black and brown and from a variety of backgrounds to cling to. I'll see somebody on a panel with SAEM and I'll reach out to them. And so, and most of these people are just like us. They're looking to mentor and to look out. And so you see these big names like Cheryl Heron, or you see Tyson Pillow, and different people be like, oh, they're pretty chill, and you can reach out and talk to people. So I think, it's challenging to be by yourself and not be able to text and be like, sometimes you got to, do the coded thing and text somebody, be like, did you just see what just happened? So it's a little difficult when they're not there with you, but there is mentorship out there for people to help you along the career path. But I'm gonna be honest, it can make things a little bit harder when you don't have a person who personally understands what you're dealing with.
But looking outside your institution, I think is good advice.
Dr. Bradby put some helpful things in the chat as well. So see if your new gig has a URM mentorship program for faculty. Also think about things like local organizations, medical societies, local NMA, this group right here.
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely all good ideas, but going at, and conferences I think are a really great resource. That's kind of, how I got involved with ADIEM, was just going to SNMA and following the Black doctors to the meetings that they were going to, and just like, oh, I guess I'll go and hang out with you guys now. But yeah, so mentorship doesn't necessarily have to come from within your institution. And we do have a network. It's small, but we do have a network. And so we have 10 minutes left. Let's see. Are there moments when you guys feel a bit stuck in academics? Do you feel like you have the latitude to explore opportunities in the community, or have you thought about exploring opportunities in the community?
So I actually moonlight in the community, and that was one of the requirements that I told Carolinas for, me to join their faculty here was, because I was straight out of residency, I didn't want to forget how to intubate. I didn't want to forget how to do a central line, because you're basically, as faculty, you're just standing back and, supervising and giving tips. So I wanted to really make sure that my procedural skills, my leading the room skills, make sure that those were really solidified. And so I do 4 shifts in the community per month, actually.
Wow.
And so my job was very supportive of it. Some won't be. So if that's something that you're interested in, have that conversation up front. Make sure that there's not a blockout area. So make sure that in your contract, it doesn't specify that you can't work within 30 miles of the hospital, specific things like that. And make sure that, you won't be viewed negatively for doing that. So it's some academic institutions, not where I work, if a doc moonlights in the community, that person can be seen as a traitor, kind of, honestly. And so just, before you start that process, before you join that group, make sure that that wouldn't be the case, because you never want to have individuals feel like you're a traitor whenever they're honestly already probably viewing you as an outsider, as, you know, a new faculty of color or from some diverse background.
Mm.
So I'm lucky that actually like one of my sites is a community site. So at Penn, we have to work 2 sites. So I work about 80% of the time at the main hospital, and then 20% of the time at a community site that used to be Mercy Philadelphia, and that was going to close. And then Penn sort of is leasing the emergency department and acute care unit. So we are now the ER docs there. So it's kind of nice, again, because I have that time where I'm sort of the attending by myself. And again, as a new graduate, I wanted to be able to manage patients on my own. And we do have second year starting to come there, but for the most part, I see everybody by myself. I'm intubating by myself, you know, and so it's just a nice break from like the academics of the main hospital, which could be very tough sometimes because their system is a lot more complicated. But being a community site, I'm like, this is a breath of fresh air, and it's West Philly. So, you know, 90% of the patient population is Black. So, you know, for me, that's also been great. And so when I walk in the room and they're like, oh, you're the doctor, I'm like, yes. And before I got there, apparently there was no Black ER doctor. So,
Wow.
you know, so it's like, it's been a good experience so far for me.
Moonlight too. I think I won't say too much, but it's important for me to kind of, as a junior person, to keep my skills, but then also to develop my own practice pattern. And I think being able to teach residents, like, this is how you build, this is how you get your RVUs in the community. And so I think for me, it's a skill thing. It also makes me a better teacher. I get some of my best sim ideas from really sick patients I've seen in the community. And it's just nice to not have everybody asking you questions. Why are we doing this? Because I said so, because I'm going to order it. So I'm not trapped. I don't want that community life full time. It's not for me, you know. So
I'm sure it looks a little bit different these days with COVID surging and everything. It's probably not the walk in the park it may have been a couple of years ago. Being single coverage provider doesn't sound super attractive right now. So we're coming down to the last 7 minutes. We don't have any other questions in the chat, but I just want to ask if you guys have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with, things or ideas that you wish someone would have told you as you embarked on your journey into attendinghood.
That's a good question.
Like, I talk too much, but I'm gonna give mine real quick. So I think the biggest thing I've struggled with and has taken me some therapy over the last 2 years now to work out is, and I hinted at it before, is this sort of imposter syndrome bit. I think a lot of us get into these spaces and we're like, you know, I don't know that I deserve to be here, or I need to volunteer to teach this, this, and this because I need to show that I've earned my spot. You've earned it. You went to med school, you finished residency. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, and you're more than enough to be at that table, and you are competent and you are confident and you are great. That's all I want to say.
That's cool. And I'm taking that to heart, actually.
But kind of pigging back off of that, actually, one really important thing is get a therapist. I think it's so I actually got one when I moved here because, you know, I was struggling so much. Like, I'm studying for boards, I'm in a new city, and I'm just like, again, all this imposter syndrome. Do I belong here? You know, I'm from a 3-year program working at a 4-year, like, so it's just a lot. And so actually one of my attendings when I left residency, she was like, you should definitely get a therapist. Like, I recommend every new ER doctor get it. And because there is so much that we see and probably have not been processing over these last 2 years with the pandemic that we've all kind of been holding inside. I think that's been really important for me. So that is one piece of advice that I will tell everybody is get a therapist.
Absolutely. That's
both of those. I definitely have a therapist. The thing that I would say is learn how to say no. So as soon as you enter academics, people are going to be like, oh, there's this super enthusiastic new junior faculty member that wants to take on this project that's completely not at all related to my interest or my career development.
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you say no gracefully? So there's, you know, a few different ways. You can kind of, you know, one way is to literally say, oh, I know this great person. Like, thanks for so much for thinking of me, but I know this great person. And then punt it off because it's going to be a great project for somebody, just not you. Yep. Another way is what I call the stalling tactic. So if you just send an email being like, oh, can you tell me more about the specifics? What's the deadline? What's the support that I have? Nobody wants to go through and answer all of that.
Yeah.
And so then honestly, most of the time they don't respond to your email and you got off, you know, scot-free. Another way is just to be, you know, brutally honest and say that sounds like a great, you know, project. Unfortunately, you know, it doesn't fit with my career trajectory. So really just being very, not feeling bad about saying no, and just learning how to do it gracefully.
Yeah. And there's a comment in the chat that I think is important, that a lot of us are told, I think particularly as URM and particularly as females, I think, we're told to kind of say yes, right? We're told to kind of say yes to everything and to say yes to all the opportunities and to just kind of take, and I think a lot of us are inclined to do so, just being in the field that we're in. Like all of us are in our own way overachievers, and we're, again, lifelong students. So it's definitely, it's very difficult. It's a very difficult balance after you've kind of like adopted this mentality of like, just say yes, just put your head down and do the work they give you, to finally find your agency and find your voice. And I think if I had to say the most important lesson to as a junior attending is finding your voice and finding your own agency and advocating for yourself, because no one is going to do it for you. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for being here with us. I think we had a really great discussion. It is recorded, so it is going to be up on our website. I just really appreciate everyone who joined us tonight. Thank you for signing in, and this was really fantastic. Thank you guys so much.
Thank
you all
you.
so much.
That's wonderful.